Throughout history, freethinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and, of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi. With me is Armin Navabi, the recently deplatformed Armin Navabi. Hey, Armin.
Hello.
How's it going?
Hi.
Yeah. So Armin was recently, if you don't know, who's recently deplatformed from, the University of,
Mount Royal University in Calgary.
Mount Royal University in Calgary. So after the Christchurch attacks, they decided that the last thing we need is more dialogue. So what they did was they're like, okay, let's get Armin off of this because this will be too sensitive. Right. But he ended up doing the event anyway. Anyway, we're going to talk about that later on. There's a lot of news stories about it, so you can check it out. But anyway, yeah, Armin and I are here. And today, you may have noticed recently, we've been having a lot of guests from Australia.
Yes.
So some of them, we've had Harris Sultan, we've had Zara Kay, we've had Lara Hall, we had Nick Gray, just a lot of people, because there's something really exciting going on over there. There's a burgeoning ex-Muslim movement that's recently gained a lot of momentum. So today we also have actually just someone I've become a big fan of recently, just by reading the way that she writes, which is just so crystal clear and so impactful. And she joins us today. Omayma Mohamed, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. So privileged and honored to be here.
Oh, the honor is all ours. So I'm going to just read something that you wrote, and I got this from your Twitter timeline. You said, "My life is colored with a constant sense of relief that I escaped an abusive relationship with Allah and Muhammad, relief to be free of indefinite guardianship, relief that I can embrace my true potential, relief that I can exist without apology." So when you say these words, for everybody else who's thinking, for anybody listening who's thinking, oh, that's Islamophobic, I just want to remind them that, you are an Australian of Egyptian origin. You came to Australia when you were a year old, and you were raised as a Salafi Muslim. Salafi Muslim means ultra-conservative version.
Wow.
And then
I didn't know that.
You had to run away from home when you became an atheist around 3 years ago. And recently you started, about 6 months ago, you discovered this, the ex-Muslim movement. And now you work closely with Zara Kay, who, we're all huge fans of here.
Yes.
And she started Faithless Hijabi, and you write for them. So you've lived the life, you've had the experience, and that's why you're saying what you're saying. So can you start from the beginning, kind of tell us how, you started out your childhood, your family, your journey?
Yeah, for sure. So as you say, I was raised as a Salafi, and for anyone that doesn't know, it's a literalist interpretation of the doctrine, and basically a commitment to the way of life of Muhammad and the companions, who are believed to be the living embodiments of that doctrine. So my dad was born and raised in Egypt, and he came into Salafism in his late teens, early 20s. He was spending a lot of time at the mosque, and he actually met affiliates of the Muslim Brotherhood and became really connected with them and a massive supporter of their movement. So he was thrilled when Morsi was elected and all of that was happening. He would love nothing more than a caliphate and all of that. So he's pretty full on.
And he's in Australia. This is all in Australia.
So he was in Egypt until he was in his 30s when he left. Mm-hmm. So born and raised there. Then my mum was born and raised in Australia to Egyptian immigrants, and they were liberal Muslims or cultural Muslims. So basically their engagement with Islam was whatever parts had become embedded in Egyptian culture. So, like general modesty, abstinence from alcohol and pork, fasting, which for some reason is the thing that most non-practicing Muslims still do. I never got that because it's like the hardest thing to do. But so they lived that in Australia. And then same thing as my dad, actually. They met Salafis at the mosque, at a local mosque in Australia. Basically, they told them that they were living Islam completely wrong, that they needed to change their entire lifestyle. And they became Salafis too in Australia. Like they burnt all their photographs because this person told them that it's haram to have photos.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So really drastic changes. My grandmother went from not wearing any hijab to wearing niqab. Just drastic. And then they ended up moving to Egypt when my mum was 16. She met my dad, who was 26. They got married, had my brother, had me, and then came to Australia a year after I was born.
Why?
And then my brother was born here. Why'd they come?
Yeah.
I think my mum's parents had come back to Australia, so they'd already set up a medical practice here after their first migration. And I think everyone there knows that it's a better life in the West. They just don't acknowledge it in terms of values and morality. They just will take it for what they can get and then work against it while they're here. Like that hypocrisy never fails to astound me.
Does it come off as ungrateful to you, like the fact that they're living in a country that is better than their country because of certain values, and at the same time they're like against those values?
Yeah. I think it's not necessarily ungrateful. I think they're delusional. Like they've attributed the wrong things to their success, and they just blame everything that goes wrong in the Middle East on Western imperialism and basically the governments being corrupt, which is true, and not practicing Islam properly. So they still believe, after all the evidence to the contrary, that if a government practiced Sharia to the letter, the country would prosper. That's their belief. And they just think the West got lucky. That's actually, they think because they've stolen all the resources, they're in a position to have a, higher quality of life, and not because our values support that sort of progress.
Right.
So, it's pretty fucked up. And, I heard a lot of that propaganda growing up. But, anyway, so they came to Australia and raised us as Salafis. Their parenting was 100% the doctrine. There was nothing else, no culture, no external values, no external logic or psychology. Everything they did was derived straight from the doctrine. And they were basically, their 100% focus was establishing the slave-master relationship that we were supposed to have with Allah and preparing us to meet him on the Day of Judgment and be held accountable for our life here. So we knew from the get-go that this life was meant to be one of complete sacrifice, and that the world on earth our life on earth was meant to be like a prison. So, like in the doctrine says that believers will feel like they're in prison on earth, and that's how it's meant to be.
Doesn't that contradict the idea of moving to Australia? I mean, wouldn't you want to be in Egypt if you were trying to sacrifice everything for Islam?
Yeah, I don't know. He used to say all the time that he was really upset that he was raising us here, and that if he had his way, he'd be back in Egypt because we're getting so many sinful influences, and he didn't want to normalize any ideas that were contrary to the doctrine. But I don't know, both of his parents had died just before they left. So, and then my mum's parents were in Australia. So I just think that he followed my mum, her parents were still living. So look, I think it was a really bad choice. I'm happy about it, obviously, but from his perspective, it honestly doesn't really make sense. But that's the situation that we were in. And so we were sold a choice between a temporary hell on this earth or an eternal hell in the afterlife. And their job was to train us to follow the rules without question, and just basically prioritize Islam above everything else. And with the West, being in the West, it was like the obsession with obedience and submission was turned up like 100 notches. They were just obsessed with ensuring that we weren't influenced by, basically the godless society that they felt we were surrounded by. And to make matters worse, we lived in an area that had a pretty non-existent Muslim community. So it was just our family, pretty much. We were an hour and a half away from Sydney, which is sort of the hub of the sort of Islamic society in New South Wales. So we weren't insulated by like-minded people that were going to reinforce our values for us. And I don't know if people realize this, but like pack mentality is such a big part of Islam. Like everything is about conformity. Everything is about monitoring everyone else's behavior so that no one is able to stray or sort of go off on their own.
The word comes from Islam, is derived from aslama, which means submission.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And, you have verses like Amr al-Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, which means enjoin good, forbid the evil. Yeah. It's a Muslim's religious duty to watch for when their brother or sister in Islam fails one of their duties and to remind them. So there's a lot of safety in living among Muslims, and Muslims very much believe that too.
Can
I touch on that? We call it in Iran, it's called Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, and that is basically a license to meddle in other people's personal lives.
Definitely.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Like basically, you have permission to tell people that they're not following Islam properly. That's what it does.
Right.
Exactly.
Everyone's policing everyone else. Yeah.
It's so horrible. It's like, it makes you like, and this is the point, it's 100% by specific design to make sure that people never feel alone. They never feel free enough to explore other options, to really challenge their environment, to challenge their beliefs and the teachings. If it's being reinforced from every single direction, they're never gonna feel, number one, the need or the desire to do anything differently. So it's actually really smart.
Yeah, it's very clever,
powerful, and it's dangerous. Like the Islamic conformity is. It's and I didn't even live in a Muslim community, so I don't even know how much harder it would be.
So I want to ask one thing, because you said even earlier you described this as a master-slave relationship, right?
Yeah.
And in that quote I read, you said that it was relief that you escaped an abusive relationship with Allah and Muhammad, and that reminds me of something that Christopher Hitchens talked about, how he said that this is the relationship between God and the worshipper is a master-slave relationship, because you are supposed to love and fear this deity at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And that's the essence of the master-slave relationship. So growing up, how did you experience that, the love and fear and the master-slave, and how you describe it as abusive?
Yeah. So, like, I liken that Salafi mindset, because it really hones in on that slave-master relationship more than any other interpretation, basically as a form of psychological warfare that's designed to break you down over time, so that all that's left of you is basically a shell of a person that is ready and willing to embrace an ideology that tells you exactly who you're meant to be and exactly how you're meant to live. And it really, unfortunately, it really worked on me, because it was just reinforced from day one. And you take so much more of your surroundings than what you expect as a kid. And I was really, really terrified of God, really terrified of the afterlife, every part of it. I was terrified of the grave, the day of judgment, and whatever followed after that, it all sounded horrific to me. I didn't even want to go to heaven. I just didn't want to go to hell, right? The whole focus was on avoiding hell. And by the way, your video, Armin, about your experience with hell and the measures that you felt you had to take to avoid that resonated so much with me. Like, it's so logical. If this is the prospect that you're faced with, of course you're going to do that. It's genius.
I know. And
which is
for
so
those who don't know about Armin's story, just go our very first episode of Secular Jihadists ever. Armin told that story, and it's incredible, and it's also horrifying. So go and check that out. You can also, there's a video that Seth Andrews did. You can go on YouTube and find The Poison Pill of Islam, Armin Navabi. So look that up, and you can hear his story there. And anyway, go ahead.
Actually, I think that's the first video from the ex-Muslim movement that I saw. And this was only 6 months ago that I discovered the ex-Muslim movement, by the way. And it changed everything for me. And I just looked at that and I was like, holy shit, I really need to like look into this more, because fuck, that's exactly how I felt.
Well, now you're here, and now we're wow, that's amazing. I love it.
And then what happened?
Actually, so just to answer the question, completely fearful, petrified. I felt like I basically felt like I didn't understand God, and that he was just waiting there to punish us for any mistake that we made. Like, I had no concept of what would be enough to get into heaven, and what would be the tip over point that I'd get into hell, especially because Muslims can also go into hell. Like, that is so bullshit. No other religion has that.
It's not like Christianity, where eventually, if you would just accept Christ, you could do whatever you want. I think that's why Catholics abuse all those little kids. They know, they're like, oh, as long as I submit to Jesus, it's all good. I'll be forgiven.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think Catholic. I mean, I don't know. Don't other religions have this as well? Like, for example, if you're Catholic and you sin, and then you haven't yet gone to the church to get forgiveness for those sins, and you die between the two then you have some sins that you have to pay.
Eventually.
No? Right?
Eventually, you're going to get to heaven. We don't even have that.
No. Muslim. In Islam, Muslims will eventually go to heaven after they spend enough time in hell to pay for all their sins.
I don't know. I've heard many different versions of that. There are some people say that.
I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
There's no consistent thing, is there?
I thought that was the one thing. Whenever I told people, I'm like, oh, but eventually we'll go to heaven. They're like, no, that's in Christianity. That's not in Islam.
No,
it's eternal. It's
eternal. Wow. Okay. No, I always believed that you'd eventually end up in heaven, but that's very little consolation when you know that you're going to go into hell and have your skin burnt off and then regrown and over again, and drink boiling water and all that. Like 1 second is enough. But anyway,
wouldn't you eventually, if you go to heaven, you would be so traumatized that you're not going to be able to enjoy heaven. You're just going to be sitting in heaven and going like this.
And how could you hate God?
Yeah.
Like, why would you want to see that fucker, honestly?
I mean, what are you going to do? If you have trauma and then you go up to heaven and you've had all the skin regrown, you've been drinking boiling water, like, you're not going to, you can have all the persons in the world.
You're going to have angels coming to you and you're going to want to have sex with you, and you're going to go away from me. I don't want to talk to anybody. But I mean, they told us that for the smallest sin, you're going to have the heat of 1,000 suns experience for years. I was like, what the fuck? It doesn't.
But then there's stories like the fact that this one prostitute fed a cat, and God was like, oh, she's done such a good thing that she's going to go to heaven, and I'm going to forget the fact that she was. Like, what is that?
No, but the problem with that is that all the sweet and fluffy stuff, most of them are not authentic hadith. All the fucking barbaric shit, they're authentic hadith. Like Muhammad, every time he killed a whole bunch of Jews or tortured people, you check that and this is authentic hadith. But then the part that he was like, oh, somebody threw garbage from the rooftop on his head, and then one day she didn't, and he went and checked on him to see if she's okay. Like, oh, Muhammad was so nice. And you check it, that's actually not authentic hadith. Yeah. All the fucked up shit is authentic.
I actually need to check that one. I've been meaning to for a while, because we did, throughout my childhood, my parents would come to us and be like, oh, you know, this thing that we've been practicing, that's actually bid'ah, which is like, you know, innovation. So someone's added to the practice or added to the sunnah something that wasn't there. So that happened with a few things.
Another word for that is reform, by the way.
Right.
Totally.
Bid'ah, reform, heresy, all of that, they all mean the same thing.
Yeah.
The
Quran warns you about reform. But go on, sorry.
So basically, childhood was pretty, very intense. They were super obsessed with monitoring our behavior, making sure that we didn't show any signs of being corrupted, because obviously we were so exposed to, the Western world. Like, we went to school with non-Muslims. The people at the shopping centre we went to were non-Muslims. Our co-workers were non-Muslims. Which again, you know how you were questioning why we lived in Australia? Well, then why would you live in a place that didn't even have a Muslim community? Like, it's bloody shocking. But you know who suffered? It wasn't them. It was us. Because we...
Sorry, go ahead. Finish what you're saying.
Basically, like, we were the ones that were torn between two worlds. You know, they fed us all of this propaganda that, Islam was the answer to every Western problem that we could see. Hijab is the answer to, sexual assault and rape, and marriage and gender segregation is the answer to broken marriages, and, drug abuse and alcohol abuse is solved by Islam. And we were told that classic Salafist thing of, you can't trust the non-believers. They're the natural enemies of Muslims. They will always try to bring you down. And even if it's not intentional, they'll bring you to hell with them just because of their influence. And, my family was very anti-Semitic. So we had all of that going on. But in reality, what we saw was completely contradictory to the indoctrination we were receiving. But, like, there's no way of actually healthily addressing it. You're just in a situation where, you love your classmates and your teachers, and you're like, I don't want to see you go to hell. I think you're a great, decent person. But then you go home and you're told all of this crap, and then you feel guilty. You feel like you're betraying each side at different points.
Yeah. That's...
And it...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I was going to say that's kind of interesting, because you didn't, even though you were from a Salafi family, you didn't go to like an Islamic school. So when you went there, I mean, you were wearing hijab when you went to school, and you were one of the only girls who wore it. Is that how it was?
Yeah.
And then you say that 3 years ago you became an atheist. So I just wanted to kind of get into how that transition happened. How much, when you talked about all of the other kids in your class and you were thinking, I really like these people, I don't want them to go to hell. How much did that play into it?
Yeah, that was a big part. I think it throws, because the dynamic of heaven, hell, Muslim, non-Muslim is the entire basis of your life here on earth, and what the hereafter is based on. If you don't believe that hell is a just outcome, then you're fucked. Like, you can't believe in Islam and believe that or doubt that. So basically, there were lots of things like that throughout my childhood that I really, really struggled with, but I engaged in some hardcore suppression, basically just completely ignored all of those things and focused on the fiqh mainly, which is, the Islamic laws.
Jurisprudence.
So, exactly, yeah. So I basically started seeing religion through a prism of rules and technicalities, and that took all the emotion out of it. And that really worked for me, because I didn't like God. Like I said, I really feared him. I thought he was a monster, but obviously you can't acknowledge any of that. Didn't like any of the companions. I thought, like, I love in so many previous episodes, and you've gone like, Homer is the worst fucking guy. Like, and I really love that because I hated him too, but he was my dad's hero. Like, literally, they named my younger brother after him. And every story, I was like, what the fuck? Like, this guy's an absolute douche. But anyway, what was I saying? So, lots of. Go ahead. So yeah, just suppressing a lot of that stuff. Trying to look at it in a much more technical way, because then it removed me from all the resentment and the doubts that I was having. And I was also really struggling because, and this is the worst part, is that I was experiencing the exact doubts that they were warning us against constantly. So they're telling us, you know, the shaitan's sitting there waiting, shaitan being Satan, is sitting there waiting to, you know, basically, like, in your most vulnerable moment, when you're least expecting it, he's going to come in and put doubt in your heart, and then that's it. Done deal. Your one-way ticket to hell.
So
and
well thought out.
It really is. Because
so they've covered all their bases.
Yeah, like, if you become your own worst enemy, because you start to see yourself as weak and corrupted, and then you hate the fact that you're having these thoughts, and you hate yourself for putting yourself in danger, and you just, like, you can't see any of it as being legitimate. Like, I didn't feel valid in any of the feelings that I had because everyone else seemed so secure in their faith. So Salafism did a real number on me, and I was an emotional mess without realizing it because I was ignoring all of it, and just trying to make the best of my situation. And then, like, another sort of spin to the story is that my brother really, really struggled with Salafism. He didn't want to be my parents' puppet. He just wanted some space. He just wanted to, you know, play sports with his friends, do his own thing. And he absolutely couldn't do that. My parents wouldn't leave him alone. They'd always say, like, they actually wouldn't leave us alone in our rooms because they'd say the shaitan preys on individuals that sit alone. Yeah. Basically, they think that you're easier to manipulate and control if you're alone, whereas if you're surrounded by people, they can remind you about Islam, and you're never meant to really engage in discussions that aren't about Islam. You're meant to be talking about Islam all the time.
Holy shit.
According to yeah, it's really crazy. And so we weren't allowed to sit in our, like, be left alone in our rooms for, prolonged periods of times. We weren't allowed to go out with our non-Muslim friends who we weren't supposed to call friends or think were friends for a really long period of time. We were super isolated. And the worst part is, I didn't realize this for a while, right? Islam's super misogynistic, but I didn't realize it was misogynistic for a while because my brother got so much shit as well. Like, he got a lot of criticism, a lot of hate, but the reason is still misogynistic. So it's because of the guardianship system. The men in Islam are the only ones that are ever going to be responsible for their own behavior. They're the only ones that have the capacity to influence anyone else around them because they manage the woman's affairs and their own. They're the ones with the sense of authority, and they're the ones with independence. So as long as they're devout, the entire Muslim society theoretically should be devout, right? Because women can't make a deviant choice. Women can't choose to sin because they don't have choices to begin with. Like, they can't choose to do the wrong thing because they don't have the power to do so. So my dad really honed in on my brother because they wanted to make sure that he was prepared to lead his own family one day. And if he wasn't home, then he'd be my guardian, right? He'd be my mum's guardian. He'd lead us in prayer. He'd, protect us, take care of us, discipline us if we did the wrong thing. So, yeah, basically he really struggled, and the house became extremely hostile. Their relationship basically completely broke down because he would pull further away. My dad would push him even harder. He wasn't allowed to leave the house because they wouldn't even let him move out. So this is what I mean. Like, generally it's the women that aren't allowed to move out or live away from home. They wouldn't even let my brother because they saw him as, an at-risk Muslim.
Well, he was also surrounded by non-Muslims. That's also another thing, right? Like when you grow up in, like I grew up in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, and it wasn't that bad for the boys because when you went outside, you were surrounded by other Muslims and that same kind of culture. But I think that there was an element of him wanting to be corrupted. I wanted to, Armin, just before I know you want to ask a question, but I just remembered something when you were talking about speaking about Islam all the time, is that when I was in med school during our psychiatry rotation, I remember we were interviewing a patient who had obsessive compulsive disorder, and this is in Pakistan, right? So they had the religious sort of things on the wall, and one of them was this thing that says Allah's thought at all times. I don't know if you've seen that. And it says, when starting an action, say Bismillah. When making an intention, say Inshallah. When something is being praised, say Subhanallah. There were all of this whole list of everything. And it said that, Allah's thought at all times. And we were interviewing a guy who had obsessive compulsive disorder. And I was thinking, that's just so ironic. But it is true. Like, people do tend to think that way. But Armin, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so how did you eventually become an atheist?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was there one moment? I guess.
That will answer my. I think it would be in the answer. It would be in the answer to the question.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah. So I actually attribute a lot of it, and this is the funny part, is I started following a lot of left-wing pages because I'm sure you can guess, they were defending Islam basically 24/7. Were defending Muslims all the time. And I was like, this is cool. Like, these guys have our backs. So started getting a little bit more engaged with ideas outside of Islam because I felt that they were in alignment with Islam. Like, their whole idea was like they were supporting us. Right. So I felt that it was safe. Because generally I didn't. I stayed away from all sources that I thought could corrupt me because, as I said, I was so scared and didn't trust myself. So I really sort of barricaded myself with only safe ideas. So I started following these pages, and as you know, a lot of it is about, individuality, freedom of choice, freedom of expression. There's some chinks in that armor, as we know, with the regressive left, but the underpinning idea is all about freedom and liberty. And so I didn't agree with a lot of the things still. Like I didn't agree with homosexuality, unfortunately, at first, abortion, like sexual liberation, or like owning sexuality and that sort of thing. I wasn't on board with any of that, but I did start to view the world a little bit like it sort of chipped away at the rigidity of the Salafist sort of mentality that I'd been brought up with. And I think the real starting point was feminism, because obviously feminism was something that applied to me on a personal level. It had a personal impact on my life. And I think it was the area that I was most willing to challenge about Islam, because I basically had a barely suppressed rage at all times about how women were regarded in the doctrine. The guardianship system, that really killed me. Like, as a Muslim, that was the hardest thing for me to deal with. I honestly, that was some hardcore cognitive dissonance for me to stay Muslim while being that angry about the guardianship system. I don't know how I did it, really.
So what is it that you didn't like? Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, the infantilizing of women, the fact that as soon as you're born to the moment you die, you are accountable to another human being simply because of your gender. There is nothing about, like, males are instantly awarded authority, independence, and respect, not based on their individual qualities or attributes, but simply based on the fact that they're men and are inherently more capable of running society, running their families, and running their own lives. And like, I just, obviously, as a woman, you can't really accept that. Like, you can't accept that you're less capable than your 13-year-old brother. So I also had a younger brother. That he started leading me in prayer at the age of when I was 20 and he was 13. And I was like, what the fuck? Like that actually, I was so angry about that. Or every time he'd leave me, I'd be like, go into it like really sarcastic. I'd be like, here we go. Cool. Leave me in prayer then. Like, I was so irate about that. But in all aspects of life, it, you know, it was just, it was horrific. And I actually remember one time I had to travel somewhere, and obviously you can't travel without a mahram, right? So we were looking at the actual ahadith to figure out, okay, what's the evidence? Is there any loopholes? Because obviously there's a lot of different interpretations. So some scholars believe that you can go with a group of women. So like a group will sort of replace a male guardian. So some people have flexible interpretations of it. So we were looking at it. And I came across a hadith that I don't remember which companion it was, but he said something like fathers need to be really careful of who they give their daughters in marriage to, because once they're married, they are essentially slaves. And you've got to be careful of who you give that unadulterated power to, because your daughter's life is completely dependent. Her quality of life is completely dependent on who this guy is and what he'll do with that power.
He owns her. No.
He owns her, exactly. No. And I was sitting there between my mum and dad, and I just started crying. Like literally just as soon as I read it, I was just bawling my eyes out. And my dad was like, what's going on? Like, what?
Yeah.
And I just couldn't speak. I just was like, what do you say? Like, and then my mum was on the other side, and she was like, oh, just give her a minute. And I was like, it's just that seeing on a page that you on entering into marriage, which is your only like option if you don't want to stay tethered to your dad forever, you're basically entering into a contract of slavery. Like that is such a horrific reality to be aware of, and it just hit me really, really hard. So lots of examples like that. But basically I didn't like the fact that...
Where was this written? This was like a hadith or what? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a hadith. I found it again recently, but I'm not 100% sure what source it is, but I did find it relating to Mahram issues on Islam Q&A, right, which is that website.
Yeah,
so
I've seen that website.
If you find it again, send it over to me. I just saw I accepted your, we're friends on Facebook right now. So if you see it again, send it to me.
Yeah,
that would be very interesting to see. Okay, cool. Go on.
Yeah, because that's probably the most full-on one. But then you've got other ones that say, like Muhammad said, and this is definitely authentic, that if he were to order any human being to prostrate to another human, which is it's forbidden in Islam because you're only meant to prostrate to God, right, it would be a woman's husband. So a woman, if he were to ever tell another human being to prostrate to another, it would be a woman to her husband. I mean, that says it all.
Right.
Like, it's basically like your relationship with God 2.0, like a lesser version of that. Right. It's just horrific. And anyway, so because I was Salafi, I came across all of this just naturally. Like I didn't even have to find it later on and then leave Islam. I knew all of this as I was growing up. None of it was a surprise to me. It was just, I didn't know what to do about it, basically. So when I started,
the moment I realized that this is, when I was reading the Quran, I don't remember exactly which part of the Quran it was, but at some point when I was reading it, I realized like, wait a minute, this is written in a way like it's talking to me, but it's assuming that I'm a man, right?
Yeah.
Like I was like, wait, this book is not written like when it was written, it never assumed that a woman might be reading this. Like the audience is men by default. Like I don't know exactly which verse it was, but it was speaking to men speaking to the reader, and it was talking about their wives. I'm like, wait, what if I am the wife that is reading this? Like, this is definitely not a book for everyone. But go on, sorry.
Yeah, definitely. But again, it was just one of those issues where, like, I knew I was seeing inequality and injustice, but none of my role models showed me that it was okay to feel that way. So once again, I felt like I was in the wrong. I felt like I was seeing the world like incorrectly, that I was corrupted. So it took feminism, and it took having a way, like a language to articulate these thoughts and these ideas for me to actually recognize the inherent truth of them and to break through the spell of that fear. So basically, like, and as an example, I was always really passionate about like advocacy for, you know, sexual assault survivors and domestic violence victims. And then, so when you're reading about it and they're analyzing what the root cause of these issues are, and, you know, how as a society we need to challenge some of the, you know, deeply held ideas that we have, to challenge it long term rather than through Band-Aid fixes like more funding and, you know, campaigns. We actually need to challenge how we view women to change these things long term. I saw a lot of overlap between the factors that they're identifying as creating the conditions for sexual assault and domestic violence with the doctrine. I saw that the doctrine contained a lot of the same ideas that promoted that treatment. So basically, again, it comes back to the guardianship system. If you have, when they talk about combating domestic violence and sexual assault, they say we need to challenge people's ideas of what women are entitled to. And the biggest part of that is, you know, emphasizing that women need agency, they need choice, that, you know, they need opportunity and independence within their lives, and that they need to be able to exist on their own terms. They exist as human beings. They don't exist as, you know, a relationship to a man. They don't exist as sisters and wives and daughters and aunts. They exist as women. So they talk about challenging these ideas, and Islam does nothing but reinforce them. Like everything about Islam makes women, you know, the property and ownership of men, and they have to exist in accordance to men. And it basically, it can't exist within a society that wants to empower women, because their entire position depends on the fact that they are owned by men.
Yeah. Did you, you know, so if these were the reasons, did you try to look at other religions when you left Islam and you decided, first of all, was there like one moment when you finally said, okay, that's it, I don't believe anymore? Or was it just do you remember a day, a straw that broke the camel's back? And after that, did you explore any other religions or think, okay, maybe there's something else out there for me?
Yeah. So I think like the nail in the coffin was learning that hijab was, you know, basically a myth, like what we thought the function of hijab to be a myth. But when I started, again, like the language of feminism, like understanding what victim blaming was, and understanding that modesty puts the onus on women to prevent their own assault, it actually perpetuates rape culture and that sort of thing. That was when I realized that, so hijab is such a big part of a woman's role in Islam. You know, modesty is an integral aspect of her identity. It's an integral aspect of her position within society, whether she's marriageable or not, whether everything about her morality is dictated by it. So if I starting to question whether hijab made sense, it was a huge blow basically to my confidence in Islam.
What do you mean what do you mean it's a myth?
It's just the purpose that we're told that it serves. So the idea that it protects us against sexual assault, that it honors us, that it empowers us, because it allows us to basically, I don't know, like the argument that I sort of held on to like just before I left was that it was a tool against the patriarchy, because we weren't giving into our sexualization and our commodification as sexual merchandise. So we were basically depriving men of their entitlement. to our bodies by covering it up.
So that was the myth. What's the reality?
So what I started understanding was that hijab perpetuates the sexualization of women by, it still defines them by it, because if their inherent existence requires them to be covered up and to modify their behavior, then you're still saying, sorry?
I'm saying that then it's the same thing. They're still sex objects.
All right, go on.
Absolutely.
They need to be covered
exactly.
up.
Yeah. So when I think it was actually a Facebook post that talked about modesty and said, hey guys, you do realize that this is sexualizing women as well. For that exact reason, you're still defining them by their sexuality and their femininity. I was like, holy shit. Okay, that makes so much sense. And then I started thinking about hijab within the whole framework of Islam, the whole framework of how women exist. And I started thinking, okay, if Muhammad was wrong about this, if hijab doesn't solve the problem, and it's very clearly a band-aid fix for someone with limited knowledge and limited understanding of human psychology and how society can actually progress better, there's no way it can be divine. So what it allowed me to do was actually think about it in terms of the broader understanding of Islam. And I just thought there's no way that a prophet from God could propose something that was so clearly ineffective, so clearly false, and basically made things worse. Like it's entrenched that problem even further than I would say it would have been back then. Like it's so hard for us. Like we're still, even in the West, even though we've rejected religious influences more than the Middle East, we're still struggling with this idea that a woman's presence, like the way she presents to society, is in any way to blame if she was to be assaulted. Like we still have police officers saying, what were you wearing that night? Were you drinking? Right. That sort of thing. So it's so insidious that there's no way someone that was coming from a divine being would propose that as a solution. Surely they would have known that they needed to actually make women equals if men were to respect them. You don't cover them up to make them worthy of respect. You actually change how they're viewed and what their position is in society.
So when you did, but so you go through this process. You're exposed to, I guess, some of the leftists, and you move on to looking at feminism, and this has a huge impact on you. And you said that 3 years ago, when you became an atheist, you left home. So how did you tell your parents? Did you take off your hijab? What was that confrontation like?
Yeah. So basically, after having that moment of realizing that the hijab made Islam seem like a bit of a joke, I sort of thought about all the different issues that had bothered me and assessed them against this new, basically only then I'd given myself permission to look at it objectively. So then I started thinking, okay, what do I really think about this thing that I've been wondering for years and years? And I came to the conclusion that, it was insane. Like none of like the entire purpose of our lives being a test when God already knows exactly what's going to happen. Free will, destiny, all of those things that bother really every human being. Some of us are just better at pretending than others. Basically just looked at that thinking, okay, I actually now potentially am going to do something about these doubts that I'm having. What do you really think? And sort of went through methodically and thought, okay, this is bullshit. And then, but I was like in such a shit position at that point because I definitely couldn't tell my parents. It just didn't even cross my mind to tell them, really. Like it was so ridiculous to me that I would...
How long ago?
Wait, what was it ridiculous?
Well, the idea of telling my parents that I was having doubts about Islam, just based on the fact that, my brother not wanting to go to Friday prayers, my dad told him never to come into the house again if he stopped going to Friday prayers. Oh. So zero tolerance for deviation. I was like, I'm not going to tell them this thing that has Islamic precedent for murder
Oh.
Like, why would I put myself in that position?
Right.
So I actually ended up talking to some high school friends and telling them, I don't think I want to be a Muslim anymore, but I don't know what to do about it because I can't live at home and leave.
And sorry, how long, Ali asked, how long ago was this?
So that was the 3 years. It all happened pretty quickly.
Okay.
So probably within like a few months of each other, I was just started.
So you told your friends in school, then what happened?
Yeah. So then they're supportive, but they have no idea what to tell me because they're all still living at home as well. So we graduated high school by this point. So I was 21. Most of us were at uni, working part-time. So yeah, I just sort of told them, and none of them really had solutions. But then one friend basically said to me, why don't you come stay with me for a little while and just sort out your head a little bit, figure out if this is really what you want, just have some space because you don't get that at home. And I said, like, I'm not even allowed to come and sleep over at your house. Like, I'm not allowed to leave this house, like, for, you know, more than a few hours. I don't even have that option. So we basically came to the conclusion that it had to be permanent. If I did it, I had to do it for real.
Wow.
And because I was so suffocated and so restricted that my only choice was to permanently leave. And so we talked about it, and she said, you can come stay with me for a while until you get back on your feet. And I just went, fuck it, like, let's do this.
Wow.
I'm never going to get this opportunity again, and I can't live here any longer. So I left in, like, the early hours of the morning one day, drove to a house. I cried the whole way. It was an hour and a half, and I was just, like, bawling my eyes out the entire time, and got there, and I don't know, it's a bit of a blur now, but basically just one foot in front of the other. First, I, got a job. Then I had to find a place to live, and just all the practicalities that are pretty boring. But I had no idea what my parents would do, like what lengths they would go to, because I'd had so many arguments with them about like extreme vigilante, like consequences to people. I don't know, like, so we'd argued about terrorism a lot, argued about, honor killings, and like my dad would never outright condemn that stuff. So he wouldn't say, yeah, it's great that like innocent people are getting killed, but he knew that there's a basis for them in the doctrine. So he couldn't say, I believe these people are evil, or I believe this is wrong, right? So I had I didn't know how he would react. I thought there was a possibility that he could come after me and hurt me because he's all about the doctrine. He's a living, breathing doctrine.
Did he ever hurt you?
No. So it was about probably a year and a half until I saw them again. And
did they call though? I mean, you just took off. Did they? So,
So
what was it?
I mainly spoke to my mum, and it was just so. It's honestly, looking back on it, it's really surreal. Like, I feel like I'm replaying a movie that I watched. But I don't know. Like, I tried to talk to her about it without outright saying that I'm an apostate. So, I would just say, look, I have a real issue with the idea of God. I don't really understand it. I don't like how, I don't agree with women's rights in Islam. I'm really having trouble with Islam. That's sort of how I said it. Mm-hmm. And I said, I need to have space to figure it out and figure out what I want to do, because you guys don't give me that space. I wouldn't even be able to take off the hijab at home.
And
how am I meant
say?
To? I don't. You know what she said to that? She said something like, if you live with other people, they're going to bring alcohol into the house, and then you're going to be around people that have alcohol, because that's haram, right?
That was her main concern.
Yeah. It really was like, you're going to be exposed to alcohol. And I was like, I'm literally telling you that I don't believe in God, and that people are going to drink alcohol around me. It is pretty funny. It's unbelievable. But I just had no idea how to deal with that. Basically,
did you talk to your dad on the phone?
No. I was fucking terrified of him.
I kind of know if she had said, listen, you have to believe in God, come back, we'll convince you, that's something you were kind of set on. But she probably thought, okay, you may still, maybe if I tell you there's going to be alcohol around you, maybe you'll get scared into coming back, right? I think that may have been the thought process. But this is your first phone call after you left?
Yeah. I was in the car driving away, and so I was talking to her on the Bluetooth, and she was like, what can we do? Like, we'll let you take the hijab off if you want. And I was like, it's too far gone. Like, it's too fucking far gone for you to let me, take the hijab off. And we'll let you work late, because they basically wouldn't let me work after like 7 o'clock. So I was working in retail, and they'd always make sure that I was home before dark. And so I was like, so they were like, oh, we'll give you a little bit more freedom.
See, I think that what they don't understand is that they're like, okay, we let you do this, we let you do that. The whole idea of just you being in a position to have to let me do things is the problem, right?
Exactly.
But do you remember the first time? Was it a unique experience or anything when you took off the hijab in public or anything like that? Do you remember that, or was
what was the first taking it off? When did you do it?
So I got to my friend's house that day, and I was wearing the hijab, and then we went out to get like food or something that same day, and I still had it on. And she turned to me and said, "Well, like, are you still wearing that? Like, what?" And then I went, "Oh yeah, like, all right, let's do this." And I took it off, and it was an incredible feeling. Like, I was just like walking around the shopping center, and I kept saying, like, looking at her, and like I had a smile like this big, just like, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like, it's so stereotypical, so cliche, but like the wind on your neck, and it's not wind because I'm inside, but even just having it exposed and like just thinking, no one's looking at me. No one cares that I have my hair showing now. No one cares if I have my limbs showing. It's not, like, it's such a, it was pretty crazy.
It's very funny that you say it's cliche, because most of our audience is not familiar with why you're saying it's a cliche. But the fact that this is a cliche is actually beautiful to me as well, because what you're referring to is like a lot of ex-Muslim women, they say that, they felt the wind in their hair, they felt it on their neck. So for you, it's cliche. For most people, it's not. Yeah. But to me, that the fact that this is a cliche means it's very common, and to me, that shows how unique of it. Like, it's so revealing for people, for outsiders to know. Like, people, that's such a basic thing, which is feeling the wind on your hair, is such a profound experience for people, and that shows how tight of a box they were trapped in. That's the experience that they remember when they took off their hijab. So, I mean, for me, that's the fact that it's a cliche is beautiful.
The only non-cliche story of this we heard, which cracked us up, was, I think it was Nick, right? And she's like, she made the mistake of the first time she took off the hijab, she did it on a very cold day. And she's like, my ears
wanted to put it back on.
Like, okay, that's the answer we were expecting here. That doesn't fit our preconceived narrative on secular jihadists. It was hilarious.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's true. But I also remember that same trip to the shops, turning to my friend and going, oh, I can buy perfume now. Because, perfume's haram for women, and it's basically equivalent to committing adultery because you're enticing men. And so, like, because we were just walking past shops, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not wearing hijab now. Now I can smell good. Like, it was just, not that I smelled bad, but you know what I mean?
But
it was crazy.
You said, go on, sorry.
No, you go.
No, I'll ask later after you say yes, but go on.
So the next few weeks, I basically, I think like I mainly did it to make it real in my mind that I was actually free, but I actually did all the things that, the big things that are haram. So like I ate pork, which was a big one. I actually didn't really want to because, again, it's so it really shows how strong indoctrination is that I actually felt a little bit repulsed by the idea of eating pig meat because you're told for so long that it's impure, right? It's filthy.
I still can't do it. Yeah.
Really? At all?
No. I've convinced myself that pepperoni and bacon are not pork. Prosciutto, right. I don't think I can live without prosciutto. But then, stuff like pulled pork sandwiches, I still can't do that. It's still
where it's like the actual flesh, like you.
And a lot of it is it's an association because, over here, people who are, if you're told your whole life, like here, that you shouldn't eat dog meat, and then you go to a place where people eat dog meat, so a lot of it isn't even the religion; it's just the association that you've developed, with
definitely, But I was really surprised by it because it's the one thing that I couldn't do, even though I was free to.
Right.
So that was, quite surprising. I ate it just for the symbolism, but I didn't really start eating it until 6 months. But yes, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Go ahead. There's some of the other things that you did. Yeah.
So I drank alcohol. And my first taste of red wine was that it was like bin juice. I still agree with that. But tried it a little bit more. I went and got a tattoo for the same. It might have been 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks. So just the symbolic stuff. I went on Tinder.
Okay.
Just all of the big things that I was like, not because, again, like I'm sure Muslims will look at this and say, oh, you just left to sin, the classic thing.
Right.
But
sorry, I got to interrupt. I just have to say one thing.
I just want our patrons to note that it's Ali that is interrupting.
I totally own it,
right.
But this is really important.
Okay.
I want everybody out there, there's this thing when people talk about these things and everybody else like, well, you just left Islam so you could drink and you could have sex and you could just own it. Just say, yes, I did.
Sure.
Yeah. Why not?
I actually agree. Like it's ridiculous that we should have to pretend that we're still following their standards of morality because we've discarded that. We've rejected it. I don't believe that doing that stuff's immoral. So why should I not do it? I completely agree. But at that point, it wasn't really because I wanted to. It was because I wanted to shock myself out of feeling tethered to that ideology. So, so the last few years have really been more of that, like enjoying my freedom, figuring out what I want out of life, setting myself up with financial stability, all the normal person stuff. But I am actually really struggling with the relationship with my family. I still don't really know what I want out of it. Because there's a lot of hurt and resentment there. There's a feeling of betrayal that I felt like I had to leave home without telling anyone just to fucking believe what I wanted to believe. And now they know that I'm atheist, and they still want a relationship with me, but I don't really trust it just because, I heard for my whole life that, atheists are going to hell, atheists are the lowest of all people, and, apostasy is the greatest crime that you can commit, one that will, haunt you in this life and the next. It's just so much garbage that I heard my entire life that it's really hard to trust that they feel that way.
Maybe they changed their mind, though, no?
Yeah, 100%. I'm just really scared still. And my instinct is to protect myself because they've betrayed me before.
Okay.
So that's why I acknowledge that it's a struggle because I know I'm distancing myself from something that may be good, but it's hard. It's really hard to undo that. That's sort of my current project.
Yeah. How many siblings do you have? How many? You said you had 2 brothers, one older, one younger, and what is their status with your parents? right now?
I think my older brother, the one where the relationship had gone to shit. He's got a functional relationship with them now. So he's Muslim, but he's Muslim on his own terms. And I think that separation earlier on and all that angst sort of meant that he doesn't have, like, he's not holding back now. He has already said, I don't want to be a Salafist. I don't want to live your way. And if you want a relationship with me, then you've got to accept that. So he sort of set that standard earlier. So it's a bit easier maybe for him. But I don't really have a relationship with him either because...
Why?
The trauma of their, like, so my dad and my brother and my parents, them going through all that anger and hostility, that destroyed all of us because we were in the one house, and my brother basically turned on me and, like, he bullied me and was really, like, he took his anger out on me because obviously, you know, when you're oppressed by a tyrant, you don't direct your anger back at them because you can't. So you direct it sideways. And that's what he did. And again, like, maybe he's changed. He's still got a lot of anger issues because of that experience. But yeah, that ruined our relationship too.
It's very kind of you to be so understanding of somebody that, like, was so mean to you. Like, you're not, like, blaming him. You're actually seeing him as a victim, which is very kind of you to think about, you know, that way, given that what you've experienced from him.
Well, I mean, I haven't really done anything with that understanding. Like, I don't talk to him, but I really did see us as all of us as victims, but not of my dad, because my dad was just following the doctrine. I see us as victims of Islam. That's
your dad is also a victim.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. It forced him to, reject his most human instincts to unconditionally love his children and to show compassion and understanding. He couldn't do that because the doctrine doesn't allow him to. So, yeah, it's a bit of a mess, but that's what I'm working through.
You said you met him 1 year after?
Yeah. So that was, it was pretty okay. I went back to our house. I don't know why. I don't know what made me feel safe enough to do that or what opened me up. I can't really remember, but it happened, and yeah, it was okay. But we were obviously all tiptoeing around the elephant in the room, and it was pretty uncomfortable because I felt like I couldn't really say that much. Like I was basically just sitting there trying to not offend them just with my very existence. So
that should be like a quote or something. I was trying not to offend them just with my very existence. That's a summary of the ex-Muslim experience.
Yeah, totally. It is, isn't it?
Right. Okay. Go on.
But yeah, no, just a whole lot of messy emotions. And so it was pretty fine. And I went back another time, probably another 6 months later, same thing.
So they were nice to you.
And then I just, we just didn't talk about it, but they were so unapologetically Muslim when I was there. Like, I mean, I don't expect them not to be,
right.
But, you know, we were sitting around and they're still, you know, criticizing girls that are showing too much skin. And,
but you were showing skin.
Yeah, well, so I was wearing like jeans and a t-shirt because I wanted to be.
Isn't that too much skin in there? Okay.
But, probably, but I think they're more talking about like short shorts and maybe certain types of skin, or I don't know. But that's exactly it. They weren't really considering the fact that they are reinforcing ideas that I've rejected, and that's fine. We can have different ideas, but it's still traumatic to me that the association. So that was really hard for me because I felt like I couldn't ask them for any differently. I don't expect them to act like they're not Muslim when I'm there. That's not what I want. I want us to both be ourselves. But I think what the real issue is that I was still struggling to process my apostasy properly. So everything was like a trigger for me. Everything felt like a passive-aggressive attack, and I really don't think that's what they meant. But because I was still harboring feelings of guilt and shame about my decision, because I've felt that way for so long, I wasn't able to move forward with that olive branch as much as I wish I could. And just by the way, this podcast has helped me process my apostasy so much faster than the 2.5 years that I was non-Muslim. Like, really, just you guys bringing people on, talking about this, normalizing the experience, it helped me with those feelings that I didn't even realize were weighing me down, but I felt guilty for my decision. And having this constant source of validation and legitimizing that decision, it's really, really helped me. So I hope you know how much of an impact you're making.
Thank you. So, we're the apostasy catalysts.
That was
so we're here to make it easier for everybody.
Yeah,
but
that was so nice to hear, by the way. Thank you so much for telling us that. Yeah.
It's incredible. It was so listening to you guys, I basically binge watched like almost 2 years worth of podcasts because I discovered about 6 months ago, and I couldn't get enough. I was like, oh my God, like this is what I've been craving for 2.5 years. I just couldn't move past this roadblock, which was, the deepest part of my indoctrination that I still hadn't been able to challenge. It was incredible. It was like aloe vera on sunburn. I was like, it was almost instant. And it gave me the courage to actually, I've started going to counseling to work through some of the trauma of, the family and just the leftover feelings of doubt and shame and all that sort of stuff that I feel like I can't actually access on my own. I just need someone to like talk me through it. But the fact that you guys given me a platform, or like given others a platform to reach me and validate that experience, gave me the courage to go, hang on, I'm allowed to feel good about myself. I'm allowed to help myself, and I'm allowed to pull myself out of this because my life decision is worthwhile and I'm worthwhile. And it's really, I'm glad I got the opportunity to say that because I've been wanting to for a while.
Well, I want the opportunity right now to return that compliment, because the reason that I invited you on, I know that Armin, you met in Australia, right, Armin, when you were there? Mm-hmm. So I did was because I was reading what you were writing, and today I'm actually doubly impressed because you're what? You're 24?
Yeah.
This is going to sound really ageist, but you're so articulate and you're such a good writer, and I feel like we need that. And you're also very well thought out. When you write things that isn't just because you see people and it's completely justified, and I love the people who are angry and but there's something about you that's very reflective. It's very empathetic, and we're seeing that more now talking to you. That you have a lot of empathy. With the way that you talk about your brother and so on. So I think that voice is very important, because I think people who hear people like you speak the way you're speaking now, or who follow you on Twitter and see the way that you write things with your the threads that you put up, I think that is the kind of message that will resonate with people, that makes them feel like they're not alone. And I wanted to, I guess, with that also ask you another question, is that you went... you said that you went to you started following the sort of leftist people. I guess that's one advantage of the regressive left, is that when people do when they do pull in Muslims are exposed to things like feminism and gay rights and all that. So that is, I guess, one thing that's positive about it. But with atheism, you didn't discover the ex-Muslim movement until about 6 months ago. But were there other sort of atheist figures generally that you had seen before that you were exposed to?
Not really. And I think that's why I struggled for so long, is that like I really was just trying to I don't know if that's the cause for struggle, but I was struggling because I was trying to work through that process on my own. And just, all I did was I went, all right, I don't like God. I think he's a dick. I'm a dick. And I can't worship these fuckers. Therefore,
no offense to dicks, by the way. Yeah. We're all big fans of, yeah. Go ahead.
So it was literally just a process of me saying, these people are not worthy of my attention or my respect. So I'm leaving this. And to answer your question a while back, I didn't consider any other religions because I was so done with religion. Like no religion, no ideology for me. No. Yeah.
So, sorry. I just have to get. I know this is a little bit it's different from what we've been discussing, but I just really want to get this devil advocate question, in here, because I just want to make sure that, because when you're saying these stuff, because I talk to a lot of moderate Muslims, people that call themselves moderate Muslims or liberal Muslims, and if they were listening to this, I kind of hear them right now exactly what they would be saying, and I just want to see how you would react to it. But they would say, well, what you're talking about is not really the Islam that many Muslims experience, right? You had a very unique Salafi experience of Islam. There are a lot of Muslims that support women's rights. There are a lot of Muslims that, this is
Salafi is a minority.
Hold on. They say this is one reading of the Islam, one reading of the Quran. It's not necessarily the correct, there are other ways that you could, interpret the Quran or the Islamic teaching. How would you respond to that?
I don't know. Like, it's hard because obviously everyone thinks that their version is authentic, but to me, like, Salafism is the mentality that you're going to take everything about Islam, good and bad, you're taking it at its barest, rawest form, and you're using the example of Muhammad and his companions in the first generations of Muslims. They were called the Salafs, which is what it derives from, and practicing it without any adaptation, without any modernization, without any additional rejigging based on your own personal context and circumstances. So I don't really understand how that argument, like, intellectually, I don't understand that argument, because we were applying the religion as it is, and being as honest about it as possible. There's no sugarcoating. Right. There's no cherry picking. You're basically going, I believe that this is the truth, and that's all I need to know going forward. I'm not going to change anything, because this is the strongest evidence we have. It's written there in the doctrine.
Right.
It's black and white. Go for your life. Like, that's it. And so I know that there's Muslims that, are LGBTIQ, that they're feminists, like whatever. And Muslims can be anything, but Islam cannot be those things.
Oh, my God. Okay. So, you're perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, I when I titled my book "The Atheist Muslim," it was basically a stab at that. If you can be a feminist Muslim or an LGBT Muslim or whatever, then why can't you be an atheist Muslim, right? Totally. That was the whole idea. So, I kind of wanted.
You're my new hero now, by the
way. So I wanted to move on to something that's happening in your region of the world, right? So there is in New Zealand recently, we had the shooting, the terrorist attack at the mosque. There was a shooter who went into a mosque and killed over 50 people. What's the count now? I think 52 or something like that. 52 people. Just a horrific terrorist attack. And at the time that we're recording it, right, there has been this movement. I guess a well-intentioned movement, but as you've pointed out, still mistaken, that people, to show solidarity with the Muslims who are killed, they're now doing several things. A lot of the women are wearing hijab. A lot of non-Muslim are wearing hijab to show solidarity with them. They broadcast the azan, I think, the call to prayer. and they had somebody recite the Quran in the government, in the parliament.
Gross.
And even though I'm a massive fan of the New Zealand Prime Minister, and I love the way that she's been handling this, and I wish more people were like her. I do agree with you that she has been, she is mistaken about this, as well intentioned as she might be. So, can you kind of just outline your thoughts on maybe your reaction to what happened, and what your main criticisms are in terms of how we show solidarity with the victims?
Yeah, I was really actually quite gutted to see that stuff, that stuff occurring, because it's like, because we talk about it a lot, that we know that there's a blind spot within the left, that they basically give Islam special treatment because they view Muslims as a vulnerable minority, but in doing so, they try to suppress hate of Muslims, and in doing so, they suppress dialogue of injustices that occur by Muslims, or like are propagated by Muslims, and Islam obviously is the heart of the issue. And so, yeah, seeing like on the day that the attack was reported, this immediate, like, just massive posts of people saying, see, this is what happens when you have people criticizing Islam. They give a motivation to people to go out and carry these acts of, like tragic circumstances, and it's all because you've created an environment of hate and mistrust of Muslims, and it was just really, really devastating to hear that come back. Even though it's not at all surprising, because we know that for some reason it's completely unacceptable. Like we've been talking about, there's a big priest like Cardinal Pell that was recently actually convicted of pedophilia and
child molestation.
And everyone was talking about it. Everybody was celebrating the fact that this guy had actually been, penalized for it. A lot of people were saying it's not nearly long enough. Like, that was mainstream national discussion, and there was no conflict there. Everyone was united on that. And then, you have people wanting to criticize the doctrine of Islam for the same things. Like, to me, it's the same as criticizing the church. They're still, they're both sources of, religious ideas. And suddenly, we're all being dragged through the mud for giving rise to this sort of, hate and bigotry. And because I actually used to be, again, you guys are responsible for exposing the regressive left to me. I was completely blind to that hypocrisy. Like, when I left Islam, I became a hardcore leftist, and was all like super buying into identity politics and the victimhood narrative. It was really powerful to me, and I was really, really, really invested in it. And so only recently I've had to rethink everything and go, oh my God. Now, I think because when you leave Islam, you have a massive void. And so I just filled it with like leftist ideas and rhetoric. And so then once again, finally had gotten settled, and then thought, oh no, now I need to reevaluate all of my ideas again. So thanks for that. So like, I was seeing a lot of friends post the same thing, and really recently I would have been sharing the same posts, just saying, we need to take better care of what we talk about, and, not make inflammatory remarks. And what a lot of them were saying was demonizing not Muslims, but Islam. They're saying we can't demonize Islam. And I was like, why not? Why can't we? Yeah. It's, but yeah, anyway, so that was really, really upsetting.
So can I just say one thing? I want to see what you think about this. One thing I'm telling people is, like, if you saying like critics of Islam are responsible for violence against Muslims, how is that different from saying Muslims who advocate for Islam are responsible for Islamic terrorism. Like that would be also that's like these people that are making these claims, they rightfully so will recognize how ridiculous it is if we go to all Muslims or anybody promoting Islam and telling them you are responsible for Islamic terrorist attack. We wouldn't make that accusation. So how is this different?
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of the people who are saying this are actually in the atheist community, and I've said to several of them, and I think Armin mentioned this as well in one of the previous episodes we had on this, is that all of the other atheists are saying, well, you criticize Islam. They're American atheists, right, which is a group that I love. American atheists put out, they shared that article that said that critics of Islam like Richard Dawkins or they're the ones who are responsible for the New Zealand shooting. They hold the blame. And I was just wondering, I'm like, you guys have been criticizing Christianity forever. So are all of the deaths that are happening, or the Christians who are being killed like in Pakistan or who are being persecuted, what if I blamed you for all of that? That's because of your rhetoric about Christianity. It's just completely ridiculous. Another thing that Armin said recently in his CBC interview when he was deplatformed that I really liked, and I've also said before to people, is that there are a lot of Muslims who don't like atheism. Like it's a very easy concept to understand. They don't like atheism. They despise the fact that, but they're, I'm talking about my Muslim friends, but they're okay with me as an atheist. They're like, okay, you're an atheist, whatever. I don't like atheism, but if you want to be an atheist, be an atheist. And that is exactly how simple it is to say that, I despise Islam. I don't like Islam. I think it's crap. But yeah, if you want to be Muslim, be Muslims. And, that's your right.
Beyond just letting people, even befriending them.
Befriending them, appreciating them, loving them, being in relationships with them. I mean, there are many people I know who are in relationships with like ex-Muslims or in relationships with believing Muslims, and it works. That doesn't mean that you have to like Islam. It doesn't mean that the other person has to like atheism. So this is just such a simple point that I think is lost on almost everybody.
Yeah, I think I don't know if the issue is that I don't know, because obviously on the internet you get a concentrated view of something and it's not necessarily reflective of the entire population or proportional. But I don't know if there's that many or like a strong presence of Muslims that are making the same point. Like I don't know if on their side of things they're saying, yeah, we're okay with people criticizing Islam as long as we can maintain a respectful dialogue. I think that's quite rare. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
It's rare, but it's growing.
It is growing. It's actually become a lot more common, especially here in the West. And I think that I guess I would credit to some extent, as much as I hate to do this, is the regressive left in the same way that you described earlier with your experience, is that so generally what happened in the U.S., for instance, before George Bush before 2000, the majority of Muslims would vote Republican, right? Because they had the same kind of views on abortion, and they were conservative, and they were socially conservative. And then after 9/11, what happened was they started voting Democrat. And then after 9/11, an interesting thing, when they started moving towards the Democrat, the Liberal Party, they also started these things about gender equality, tolerance of homosexuality. All of these things started improving. And now, polls now show that in the U.S., over 50% of Muslims actually are okay with gay rights, which was never the case before. It's a massive jump. So I think that that's also had something, some sort of role to play in it, but so you do hear a lot of Muslims here saying that, okay, yeah, you can criticize Islam, we're willing to do it, we'll engage you in debate, but we have to respect Muslims' rights. They don't totally practice it properly. They still get really upset and take everything personally, but at least that concept is kind of beginning to take root in people's minds.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not getting. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You don't let us if we interrupt you and you want to say something, like just be like, no, let me finish, like just go for it.
Yeah, we're talkers. Just jump in. And
just be like, Armin, shut the fuck up. I was saying something. All right.
No, I mean I want to hear what you guys are saying too. This is so great for me. Okay. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm like, yes, please tell me what you think. I don't know. Like it's. When you're describing the influence of the regressive left in improving these other sort of ideas of acceptance and equality, but isn't the regressive left reinforcing sort of the victimhood mentality that Muslims are already prone to? As a Muslim, I was so much on the victimhood bandwagon, which I think is why I went straight to the left, because I was like, I really identify with this as being a defining identity trait.
I think we're using the left and regressive left interchangeably, and I think I suggest we don't do that, because I don't think most of the left is the regressive left. I think the regressive left is just a loud minority in the left. I think there's
I don't think so. I think most leftists would think that this idea of wearing hijab for solidarity is a good idea. I mean, that's a regressive idea. But I mean, here's the thing. I think it's still. I don't think they're bad intention. And when you talk about this, when this comes up, they do. They're increasingly. There are many more people on the left who are leaving the whole. I can't tell you how many messages I get that. Oh, I used to be a regressive. I used to be pretty much regressive all the time until I heard you guys starting to speak. And they always say this. They're like, when we heard ex-Muslims speak. Right, because they were liberal. They thought the same things we did about freedom and about liberty, equality, diversity, women's rights, gay rights, patriarchy, all of this. They would come up and they would speak about these things, but they said that there's one blind spot that the left has, and that is this, and that opened my eyes.
Why is it? Why is it that they say that? Oh, when I heard ex-Muslims speak, because they still have this idea that like, oh, these are brown people, so I have to listen to them.
No, Armin, no, that's simplistic. They're doing it because ex-Muslims have been through an experience and they describe their life. Like Omayma's sitting here talking about it. When you tell your story about being a Salafist and everything you went through with your dad and mom, like there's the substance of that story. It's not just because she's brown. I mean, there's also brown people out there.
I know, but I'm just saying that if the same things that we said, if it came from like a white dude, they probably wouldn't take it as seriously.
There isn't the lived experience. That's why that matters.
Yeah, okay, even an ex-Muslim, like we had ex-Muslim white people, right? I'm almost sure that if it was a white convert to Islam that left Islam, now that person has experience. He has experience that he could speak to. But because he's white, I'm pretty sure he would be taken less seriously, even if he has the experience to back it up.
I think that you might be right in some cases,
right?
But I think that anybody who heard Nick, who was again white, and she was on our podcast, she left and she was raised as a ultra-conservative pro-jihad.
That's our audience. Our audience are more mature.
No, I think anybody who would hear that story and what she went through and hear the details of it, I think that they would forget that she was white and start listening to the story. This is.
I think go to Patreon questions soon. By the way.
Yeah, sorry, I got to make one more point. I know, Omayma, I want to let you, but one more point. Like, for example, when people say that it's all about skin color and this and that, and that people just want a woman. Like, for example, when they elect a president, the liberals, all they care about is skin color and she should be a minority. Well, I'll tell you something. If you have a white guy like Beto O'Rourke and he's running for president, and then you have Candace Owens, who is a black woman, these liberals who keep on talking about their identity politics will still vote in majority for the white guy, because it's not just about the skin. It's also about the ideas. They would not want to go. So you're
supporting what I said. So you just supported what I said, that most of the left is not regressive.
No, I'm saying...
You just said that.
They're not regressive when it comes to most things. No,
they're
not regressive when it comes to healthcare and but they're regressive only when it comes to, I think, this Islam and treating it differently.
Because of tribalism, like, wouldn't they just vote for the white guy because they're so fixated on loyalty towards their ideas, not because they're not regressive?
Yes, sure, that's fine. That's a more legitimate criticism, that it's because they have maybe idealistic tribalism, but I don't think it's necessarily because of the skin color, right? Otherwise, this, you know.
All right, I'm not gonna challenge you, because then it's going to turn into a show between me and you. But
sorry, but we usually have one of these with every guest, where the guest is just sitting down over it usually happens at least once in every guest podcast.
But we're gonna keep them shorter. But we should. So, Ali, did you make the point that you wanted to make before we go to the Patreon questions, or you want to?
Yeah, we'll go to the Patreon questions. I want to ask you one last thing. The other side of the regressive left is that right now there's a lot of conflict. I know Harris Sultan, right? You know, he started what is now the biggest petition in Australian history against Fraser Anning. So Fraser Anning is a senator from Australia who came out and he said after this Christchurch shooting that, you know, this is all because of Muslim immigration and this is why we need to stop Muslim immigration. And Harris and almost every ex-Muslim I know was outraged by those comments. So, you know, you're balancing this thing where you have, you know, some people are putting on like these repressive symbols like the hijab to show solidarity, and singing the azan and broadcasting it. And on the other hand, you have a guy, you have this other group of people that are sort of just really the overt anti-Muslim hate. And we are obviously all caught right in the middle. So how do you do that? When there's so much anti-Muslim sentiment, how do you criticize Islam and have it be heard with the people who really need to hear it?
Yeah, solve that for us.
Yeah.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah. That's
all on.
No pressure. No pressure.
I mean, look, I've gotten all my tips from you guys. When I started listening to you, how you were saying we need to be careful to always separate Muslims, criticism of Muslims from criticism of the ideology.
All the pressure on us. You just turned all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're like our mentors, so. But yeah, like So I actually, when I first left Islam, I didn't want to talk about it either because I had actually experienced anti-Muslim bigotry myself. Because obviously the area that we lived in, as I said, we were a minority, and my mum wore the niqab and I wore the hijab, and we constantly had people shouting out from cars at us. My mum got abused every single time she went to the shopping centre, to the point where I would actually, when I knew that she was going and I couldn't go with her, I'd actually be afraid and wait for her to come home. Because I was just convinced that one day someone was going to assault her. I just thought, one day words are not going to be enough. And actually some guy, we don't know if he was pretending to scare her or if he actually just missed, but sort of started steering his car at her when she was walking my brother to school one day, as in pretending to mow her down. So I had experienced that that side of things, and I thought, because I still hadn't learnt what the difference was between Muslim as a human and an identity versus Islam as the ideas, and because when you are a Muslim, there isn't any difference. You're meant to defend the idea of Islam till your dying breath. You're taught to be very wrapped up in that, right. and you're not taught to sit back and be okay with healthy criticism and healthy dialogue. That's not it's no surprise to me that we're in the situation that we're in, because I was that person. But yeah, so then when I came out of it, I was like, well, I know that this is a really big problem and I don't want to add to it. So I totally, from my own experience, understand that fear. And I think all it took for me was to understand that, or to acknowledge the fact that people are suffering, and we are still campaigning for the same things that the left is, which is, equality and justice and acceptance and freedom. And why should we not do it just because other people can't differentiate between the two? We owe it to Muslims who don't have a voice to speak up on their behalf. And if we don't do it because of the far right or because of, white supremacists, then we've let them win and we've let people suffer. How can we possibly live with ourselves? This is what I think the point that people are missing is that we're not talking about Islam to satisfy our egos, and we're not talking about it for cathartic release. We're doing it because we know people are suffering and they don't have anyone talking about it in their own communities. They don't have platforms to criticize. So we have to do it. And I don't know how we stop the wrong people supporting us and propagating our messages other than to say over and over and consistently that, we support a person's right to be a Muslim. We support their basic human rights to live with respect and dignity. But there are issues with the doctrine that they support however much, and we want to challenge those issues. So I don't know, beyond that.
Well, if there were more of us here, you'd get a standing ovation.
That was perfect. That was perfect. Yeah. That was amazing.
Well, I learned from the best. So.
Yeah. So, thank you for that. So, remember, we're going to go on to some of the patron questions that we have.
We have some really good questions, by the way.
Yeah, we do. Ooh. It's a lot of. So, first of all, I want to Blonde Infidels here. Blonde Infidels in New Zealand, and she is saying Omayma and she has an emoji with lots of hearts on it, and she's saying, I'm a huge fan of Omayma. She's so smart, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's you're like I'm just I could talk to you for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
So Lois is saying, Lois from Calgary.
Yeah.
Yeah, who's also we love her.
Yeah, we love her.
So she's saying a couple of things. First, she said you might enjoy Dan Barker's book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, which is actually a really fun book. Yeah, and awesome. She also comes from a fundamentalist background. So she's saying, raised fundamentalist, I could not go to shows or drink. When I first went to a show or liquor store, I felt all eyes looking at me, thinking that I shouldn't be there. Did you have similar feelings?
So when she was in a show, she felt like all eyes were on her. So yeah, that paranoia when of first everyone. Yeah. I don't know. No, I was very good with that stuff at sort of letting that shame go. I was more focused on my absolute excitement at being there and being able to reclaim my freedoms and rights to be myself. But I can completely understand, and I've heard a lot of other ex-Muslims say that they felt really uncomfortable. And I think it's just different reactions to the that
we had Yasmin Mohamed, who used to be a co-host on this. When she talked about it, she said that she felt almost like she was getting naked. Like, she felt even though she had completely gotten rid of the ideology, it was so deeply embedded in her psyche, the indoctrination that she had trouble taking it off. And we've heard that story a lot too.
So I think you missed a couple.
No. I wanted to go by the person because I was just bunching all the comments together. Okay. But no, I'm going to get to all of them. So we've got Mahmoud. Mahmoud is saying Australian Muslims seem to be more close-minded and strict, like the ones in Britain, unlike North American Muslims who are forced to mix into the mainstream due to a lack of generous social support.
We have the best Muslims in North America.
Yeah. So is it? But I guess he's bringing up the point of because it's generous social support. Do you think that may be one of the reasons? We've talked about this before on the podcast. So for context, once we talked about it on the podcast about how one of the reasons when I used to see people going from Pakistan to the UK or to France, when they went there, the financial assistance that they got, the social assistance that they got from the government was more than what they were getting being store owners and running their businesses in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times it's easier for them to sort of ghettoize and isolate themselves from the rest of society. Whereas when you come to the US, you can't depend on social assistance forever. So you're forced to integrate. You have to go out and make something of yourself. So I think that's the point he's getting at.
Interesting.
Do you think that has anything to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of those communities existing. You hear about sort of like polygamy being rife in these communities because they're able to get support to maintain those sort of families, because obviously the marriages aren't legal. They're just, nikah, like the Islamic contract. So they're just able to get like sort of continued support funneling in. I don't know. I didn't really see any of that firsthand, so I'm hesitant to comment,
right?
Because it just seems like anecdotal evidence.
We're not the right people to ask because we're not experts in this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it could be the case, but I think it's more likely the reason that, like, what I suspect to be the reason is that, like, Australia is. I think we're becoming more open-minded and liberal, but it's got a very conservative base. And so when my grandparents moved to Australia, they had a lot of problems integrating because people were racist. Like they didn't want foreigners coming in. And, my grandpa came as an opportunity to practice medicine. They'd actually advertised to have immigrants come in and work, but Australians didn't want them here. And so I think the reason they end up forming these communities and maintaining sort of a strict adherence to the doctrine is because they're otherized. And actually Islam gives them a global community. It gives them a community that's superior to the one that you get through nationalism.
So what you're suggesting is that the bigots might actually be pushing people to more the true version of Islam.
Definitely. And because I'm convinced that's why my grandparents went towards Salafism. I think they were craving a sense of community and they went to the mosque, and obviously dawah people. So dawah is the invitation of people to Islam, to the way of God.
We know.
Dawah, yeah.
No, but she's saying it for our audience, so thank you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, thanks. I was just being sarcastic. I'm like, we know. We've heard a lot of dawah people.
They are like, they're masters of, maybe manipulation's a strong word, but they know exactly how to hit people's vulnerabilities and what they need out of the doctrine.
That's called manipulation. That's not.
Okay, it just sounds harsh, doesn't it? So I think that they know that people have a void that they're trying to fill, and they go, hey, don't worry about the fact that you're excluded from an Australian community. We've got an even better one, and it's not restricted to Australia. It's all over the world. And, we've got the fiercest sense of loyalty that you can ever imagine. We put each other first, always. There's a conflict in Palestine, we're talking about it. If there's a conflict in Syria, we're talking about it. And, you've got the propaganda, like the Ummah, so the global Muslim community, is like one body. And if an illness or an injury affects one part of that body, the entire body feels it. And so that's what you're told as an individual Muslim, that you're part of a community so strong that you're affected by any sort of harm that comes to one part of that body. So, yeah. So
in a sense, this confirms what we always say. It seems like the bigots need the Salafis to make their points. So the Salafis are actually helping the bigots because that's what the examples that they point to, the bigots need the Salafis, and the Salafis need the bigots. Okay, so the bigots point to the Salafis, are like, look at this is what Muslims do, and the Salafis point to the bigots, like, look, because of these bigots, you need us to protect you. So they kind of help each other grow their own communities, in a sense, And
for the Salafis, they get the narrative that Muslims, have always been victims since the beginning of time. Every prophet was victimized. Every prophet was isolated and alienated. And, the prophecy of the end of times is that Muslims will be few and will be victimized then as well. Right. So they need bigots to say that, the Dajjal, and, basically that will be few in number, and there'll be lots of hypocrites, and there's a whole thing. But basically Muslims are told that they're perpetual victims. And, the bigots reinforce that narrative. And so it's like, oh, look, Islam's right. Look, they know our affliction before even we know it ourselves. Islam understands us. Islam, it caters for all of our woes and fixes our problems. It's definitely like a self-fulfilling cycle. It's a vicious cycle. Each one needs the other, and it just goes back and forth.
Right, but then they have a narrative for everything, because if they weren't being oppressed, if they were winning and conquering, then they will also say, like, look, we are in power, so we must be right. God is on our side. Like,
oh my God, yeah. They say it all the time about ex-Muslims. They're like, look at the glory and the majesty of Islam. Even ex-Muslims are thinking about Islam. Look how powerful it is.
Yeah. So
like,
which is
oh my God. So true. They have an answer for everything. It's shocking.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there is. I'll just quote Dr. Gregory House here from the TV show. He said, "If you could reason with religious people, there would be no religious people."
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
There's nothing in the Quran that's as brilliant as that. Mahmoud is asking. So Blonde Infidel also, she said something that we covered. Could you please touch on the Headscarves for Humanity thing that happened here in New Zealand yesterday? We talked about that. And then Mahmoud is asking on top of that, can you please ask, he wants your thoughts on whether the normalization of hijab by Westerners actually is making it harder to show the real harm in it. I'd like a point against the moderation of Islam.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw a tweet today actually that was saying you're perpetuating this relation that, so Muslim women are struggling against this association that, to be a true Muslim, they have to wear hijab, right? Their own community is saying that a Muslim woman's incomplete without hijab. And then when Westerners continue to show their support through the hijab, they're once again saying that the very definition of a Muslim woman is a woman that wears hijab. So they're perpetuating this overwhelming pressure for a Muslim woman to behave and conform to certain standards. And so they're basically saying the only victims, so let's say in terms of the Solidarity Day in New Zealand, they're saying that the only Muslim female victims that we recognise are the ones that wear hijab, because that's the only way they're showing solidarity. So what about the others? Are they not Muslim?
You're...
Well, I didn't make that point, so give it credit where credit's due. But it's very true. It perpetuates this toxic identity that Muslim women are fighting to their very core to separate within themselves. That modesty isn't. First of all, who gets to define modesty? Like, hijab isn't necessarily the only definition of modesty, but that you can be a good and moral and even religious, if you want to be a religious person, without conforming to these standards. So
by the way, Ali,
in terms of sorry, Armin, one thing. In terms of modesty, just while we're on this topic, in terms of modesty and its association with this job, how did your family, as a Salafist family, view non-hijabi Muslims? Like, in the sense that if hijab was supposed to be modesty and is supposed to protect you against sexual assault, and Muslim women who did not wear the hijab, which is a majority of Muslim women, do not wear the hijab, how did they process that? What did they think about them?
So the protection against sexual assault and rape was sort of the logic that I, as an individual, took, because it was the only thing that it sort of made sense, because, we see, like, in reality, really high levels of rape and sexual assault. So someone telling me that modesty protects me, I put, you can put two and two together, obviously without understanding the deeper issues at play, and think, okay, that sort of makes sense. Like, if we're in a society where this social issue is a massive problem and nobody's covering up, maybe there's correlation. So it's incorrectly correlating to things, but that's sort of what I went with. For my family, first and foremost, it was a religious duty as the slave of Allah for a woman to cover. They didn't feel the need to put any logic on it. They didn't feel the need to rationalize it. The only thing that mattered was that, Allah expects a woman to perform this duty, and in doing so, she was fulfilling a basic requirement, and in not doing so, she was sinning. And it's like a statement of arrogance that you don't need to perform this duty. You're caving to Western standards. You're basically flouting a it's like sinful sort of behavior. So my family viewed them very poorly.
Yeah.
So at one point when my family still, like in fairyland, they thought they could get my brother married and that would fix the problems with him, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously they didn't talk to him about it and he would never have agreed. And, you know, he obviously doesn't need, he's free to make his own decisions because he's a man. But they actually looked at this, they found this girl, she was like a family friend and she wasn't wearing hijab. And they thought that they might be good for each other because he wouldn't want someone that was super religious. So that was my mum's idea.
Wow.
And then my dad was like, no, she's not religious. Like she's if she's disobeying Allah on this one requirement, what else is she going to do? And how is she going to bring up our grandchildren? Then she's not going to teach them to be obedient because she's not obedient, right? Yeah. So, in summary, badly is how they viewed them.
By the way, you mentioned conformity, which is one thing Ali mentioned, which is very funny. I mention it all the time ever since I heard from Ali, was that, you know, Muhammad himself was a rebel against the society at his time, according to Sunnah. So, I mean, if you want to follow the way of Muhammad, you know, he was rebelling against the religious authority of his time.
He was a blasphemer.
He was a blasphemer. I mean, ex-Muslims should, like, just for fun, they could go to their parents and be like, hey, look, we are just following Sunnah. We're following Sunnah. We're following the Muhammad's way of rebelling against the religious authority. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's you know, when people say, "Why did you give up the religion of your parents?" I'm like, "Oh, it's following the example of the Prophet." That's exactly what he fucking did.
I love it. Oh, that's
Sunnah.
so good.
That's every ex-Muslim is following the example of their Prophet by giving up the religion of their parents.
Yeah,
I'm going to tweet that tonight.
Yeah,
that's good. So Omayma, we've got about 4 minutes left. Just wanted to say, just thank you. I can't express my gratitude in words right now. I'm so glad you came here. This is such an amazing conversation, and I think it's going to give a lot of people a lot to think about. I want to, first of all, have you tell us where people can find you.
Yeah. And you're writing
on Twitter, Facebook. Just throw out, if you can say the links for the people who are listening to this who may not read the description, that would be good too.
By the way, the description, just to be clear, because a lot of people in the live chat, the description when this becomes public, not the description of the live chat, not the live feed. Go on, say.
So it's mainly just Twitter. My handle's at Omayma M94. There might be an underscore somewhere in there. Oh. It might be Omayma underscore M94. I think so.
Let me actually just double check really, really quickly. Yeah. I can let people know.
You should know this.
Yeah, it's at OMAYMAM underscore 94. Right. So there you go.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
And where are all these great ratings Ali keeps talking about? Like, where can we find that?
It's our Twitter threads, man.
Oh, it's on a thread. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm technologically, not very advanced. So, starting with Twitter, and then we'll see what I do next.
Okay.
Yeah. You're also on. You also write for Faithless Hijabi. Can you tell us really quickly about how that came to be?
Yeah. So, one of my threads, Zara commented on it and said, "Oh, are you an ex-Muslim woman? Please submit your story to Faithless Hijabi." So I ended up messaging her and we were going back and forth, and I said, "Oh, I think what you're doing is amazing. If you need any help, let me know." So it's just a bit of back and forth. And then she came back to me one day and said, "Oh, yeah, I really do need help." So I basically, at this point, just publishing the stories. So, you know, we get them from the submissions, we edit them, sort of make them visually appealing, then just post them weekly.
You don't have a Twitter account though, Faithless Hijabi.
No, no, we don't yet. So we're looking at extending.
You guys have to set it up because the stuff that you have on Instagram and everything is amazing. So for people who are hearing this for the first time, Faithless Hijabi was started by Zara Kay, who was on our podcast. Yeah. She's the Australian ex-Muslim who's also absolutely brilliant and very, very spunky and feisty and cool. She's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Anyway. so she started it. It's really wicked. That like the name is kick-ass.
Yeah.
Faithless Hijabi. So.
By the way, Ali, I had a huge appreciation. I was just in Palestine, and I met a bunch of atheists in Palestine, and some of the atheists were wearing hijab because of their family. And I was like, oh, you're a faithless hijabi. And I'm like, like this is what Zara was talking about. You guys,
such a great term,
faithless hijabi. It started making sense to me when I started actually meeting atheists that wear the hijab. Well, go on.
Yeah, I saw the same thing in like in the Netherlands and in Belgium. And I went there, the people, because I did some talks there, and then I saw the audience. I was like, oh, there's quite a few. There's like one niqabi, there's a bunch of hijabis, and like, what's going on? So I'm probably going to get some combative questions afterwards. So I did my talk, and then they come up. No. They're like, I'm a closeted ex-Muslim.
Yeah.
And they all turn out to be so many ex-Muslims wear hijab. Yeah, it's crazy.
So now every time I meet an atheist that has to wear the hijab, I now know I tell them about, like, did you know there's an organization named after you? Like, there's a faith, and they're like, wow. Like, when I tell them there are a lot of other atheists that have to wear the hijab, they're actually very surprised, and they're like, okay, I need to go look this up, and they started like taking note about the faithless hijab. But should I like put them in touch with like who? With you or with Zara? Like if they want their stories to be sent to you?
Well, they can message the Facebook page. So it's called Faithless Hijabi.
Okay.
And we get the stories through the inbox. But there's also an email account that I only just found out about. But I think the best way is to inbox Zara on Twitter or inbox the Facebook page.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But more things are coming, so
sweet.
It's expanding.
There's a lot of.
Great.
I didn't know how big of. I thought like, oh, this is a very unique thing, but now I realize there's a lot of atheists that are wearing the hijab because they have to. Like, this is a huge thing, which is amazing. That we need to get their stories out there.
And it's actually really great that you have like this actually caters to women. Like that's one thing that's like super cool about it because there are a lot of other amazing ex-Muslim or the Muslimish type organizations that do that, but this specifically caters to women and women who've left Islam, which I think is it's a very different journey for women than it is for men. So
it's a big passion of Zara's. To create a safe space for women and work on their empowerment.
Safe space as it was originally intended, not as what it
had
become.
We gotta reclaim the term like safe space.
Not as well. Let me finish. Not as it has become, because a lot of people forget that the idea of safe space was something not similar to what the regressive left wants now. Like, it was actually something that was a good thing. It was a good idea that has turned into something, with a huge PR problem now. But anyway.
As someone who's called regressive here a lot, I want to point people out that there is a recent network of restaurants and things that people who wear the MAGA hats, the red hats, they're also looking for safe spaces where they can eat because they tend to get harassed everywhere they go. So they're finding like safe. They actually call them safe spaces too. So it's happening all over the place.
But we're not making that's a very great point. I mean, Ali, you're not making fun of them. They actually they need it. Like, it's not
they
like
do need it.
They do a lot of Trump supporters.
People snowflakes for it.
Yeah. It is funny, but
it is humorous because of the irony.
I mean, it is funny, but the fact is that we have to acknowledge that a lot of Trump supporters, even though we don't support Trump and we're not Trump supporters, and we have no idea how could anybody support Trump, but we do also acknowledge that a lot of Trump supporters get a lot of hate and a lot of abuse, undeserved abuse. And they deserve to have a place that they could go where they meet each other and not and be able to find other Trump supporters without getting all the harassment. Like, so they deserve.
Especially with the children. I gotta say, like, when it comes to kids, I'm very sensitive. I don't care if you have a MAGA hat or whatever. It's just if you're there with your family and you've got your kids there, just don't fuck with people who are sitting there with kids.
I mean, even if you don't have kids, like Trump supporters.
If you don't have kids, it's fine. Harass them all you want. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. Anyway.
I think Trump supporters should become a protected class now. Maybe.
So, blonde infidel Mahmoud. I know that you seem new here. You're a new patron. Thank you very, very much for supporting us, and thank you for your questions. I mean, they're brilliant questions. Lois, as always, So everybody who sent in their questions and their support, thank you very much. Omayma, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
It's amazing. And we had a lot of fun, and I can't wait till this goes out.
Me too. Thank you.
So, and just welcome to the scene. Just keep speaking out. You're brilliant. Okay.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you
so
much. This was so much fun.
So, we'll see you guys next time then.
All right. Bye, everyone.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.